What's going on, y'all? This is Mike Brown, and I just wanted to welcome y'all to this week's episode of The Art of Letting Go. Got a really dope episode in store for you. But while I have your attention, please be sure to subscribe to the podcast wherever you listen, and also rate the podcast, leave a review, let people know what you think. Let me know what you think because I do read the comments. Also, if you would like to further support the show, you can go to www.theartoflettinggopodcast.com where you can find merch, the Patreon. You can also send in a question for me and the guests. Yo, what up? This is Mike Brown, and this is The Art of Letting Go. Today, I have a special guest in the building, friend and consistent guest of the show, Byron Young. He introduced me to your work, and I was late to the party, but I'm tuned in now. Do you mind introducing yourself to the people?
I should be able to do that. I am David Johns. I am, anyone who knows me as a good friend knows that I'm passionate about our babies, children who did not ask to be born, and I am a disruptor. By trade, I teach, I speak, I write. I taught elementary school. I now teach college. I am a researcher. I recently completed my PhD. My dissertation focused on the experiences of Black, trans, queer, and non-binary public, middle, and high school students in the United States. And I quarterback a team at the National Black Justice Coalition, which is the nation's only civil rights organization, both intentionally and unapologetically at the intersections of racial equity and LGBTQIA plus equality. So what that means for people who will be like, that was a whole lot of letters and acronyms, is that we understand that as long as there have been people, specifically Black people, we've been incredibly and beautifully diverse. There's an author, Sambufu Some, who I cite frequently, who in a book, The Spirit of Intimacy, writes that in her village in West Africa, the words lesbian and gay didn't exist, but the word gatekeeper did. So we honor that. We also honor the teachings of Fannie Lou Hamer, who said that none of us are free unless and until all of us are free. So our work is focused on and our grows from a love of and for Black people and a desire to ensure that we all get free.
That's so dope. And congratulations on your PhD as well.
Thank you.
Of course. How are you feeling today?
I am tired. You know the Nat Ministry, that Go Lay Down song, that old girl that's with, that is playing repeatedly in my head in this moment. Pride Month is always an interesting month. Period. Full stop.
Yeah. I'm trying to get more, I guess, into contributing to Pride Month. Like I've always wanted to like speak or be on a panel or something, and it feels challenging for me, I guess, because, and this is all in my head as well, but I almost feel like I'm too masculine. Like it feels like I don't get those opportunities because of that.
Where in the country are you located, if you don't mind sharing?
I'm in LA, so I'm from Houston, but I'm living in LA.
Okay. So three things that I think in threes you'll find this over the course of our conversation. One is, do you know Better Brothers LA?
No.
So there's an organization focused on Black men in LA called Better Brothers LA. You should look them up, follow them, find them, let them know I sent you. They do an amazing thing called the Truth Awards every year. But this past year, they honored Coleman Domingo, our brother who's an actor who's playing by Rustin, who's sitting over my shoulder. The second thing is there's an organization run by a brother named Cleo Monago, who actually created the term same-gender loving, called Black Men's Exchange with an X. They're based in Baltimore, but they do programming around the country. It is for folks in particular who identify themselves and or are identified by others as masculine. We'll have a whole other conversation about that. That's two. And then the last thing is we exist in a world where, and you have this platform, right, where you can create the table, where you can have the conversation that you want to have, including the ways in which you experience a privileging of, let's say, a femme or effeminate same gender loving men. And for folks who don't know, I'm using same gender loving. We're using same gender loving because I don't identify as gay. Gay is a white male political identifier that often makes people think about white gay men and white gay men, and especially during Pride Month, short shorts and rainbow outfits and glitter makeup, who live in neighborhoods like Hollywood, California, or
Yeah.
Chelsea, New York, or Boys Town, Chicago, and draw power from being both white and gay. It also makes people think about sex and deviancy and maybe HIV. I choose to use a term created by a Black man that centers love and acknowledges I am aware and proud of my Blackness as much as I am aware of and proud of my same gender lovingness.
And I appreciate you sharing that, because I think everything that you said the word gay embodies, just growing up in the South, that has kind of been my mindset of what the word means. So to come out and then identify as this word, it still was just like, I don't know if this is me. And then going into the community and experiencing like it, I do feel like the love aspects of things does get lost. It's just sex, 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 till you pull yourself out and you realize like, oh, I'm a full human being, and so are these other people, you know. And I'm curious to know how were you introduced to the term same gender loving? Because I was introduced to it by a close friend that I played basketball with, and you might know him as well, DeMarco Majors.
I do know DeMarco. We were both on this season of The House, which is a show that airs on Fox Soul.
Yeah, and he was one of the first people that mentioned that to me, and you know, like he talked about how it was rooted in love, and it really spoke to me a lot. But I'm curious to know, like, how did you get introduced to it?
I think I read it somewhere. I honestly use it so frequently that it has become a part of me, and I credit and acknowledge Cleo in creating it. But I'm not sure the first time that I was introduced to it, but likely either hearing him saying it and or reading it. And things like that matter. Also want to go acknowledging the power and precision. You use the term that for me is like nails on a chalkboard, and it's come out. I would be fine with coming out if everybody had to do it, but that's not the way that the term works. And so in practice,
Yeah.
While on the surface I understand why it exists and the importance of it, what it does is, in part, is reaffirm the heterosexual agenda and this idea that cis heterosexual people are waiting for queer people to tell this story about when we knew we were different. It also suggests in very problematic ways that there's a singular moment where one has to make this declaration. And that's seldom the case, right? The process of inviting in, to use the term that I prefer, is one that people negotiate sometimes all day, every day.
Yeah.
So the term inviting in not only acknowledges that each of us have something that society says we should feel shame around, especially those of us who grew up not only in the South, but in Black churches in the South. It erases the hierarchical ordering of sins and acknowledges that we are equal in this regard, and suggests that, or not suggest rather, for me, hold space for the reality that I don't owe anybody anything. I'm not asking for approval. I'm not asking for permission. I don't really care if you like the way that I understand that God has formed me, being perfect and all-knowing and not making mistakes. And so I don't really feel like I'm entitled to disclose parts of what make me who I am to people that are undeserving of it and that, quite frankly, might do harm with that information. And so inviting in suggests that if we each do more to increase competence, to understand the importance of names and pronouns and things like that, and demonstrate compassion, that we might share this information about each other such that we can grow closer together and engage in more meaningful community.
Yeah, and I appreciate you sharing that, because I feel like when I first started letting people in, it felt like this process of like, I always have to just give this disclaimer of, by the way, I'm gay or I'm gay. And as I've been maturing, it's just like, that is not normal for anybody. Like, straight people don't walk in a room and have to say like, I'm straight, I'm this. And I don't know. In my journey, I'm starting to get to that point now where I just want to be Mike. You know what I mean? And yes, these are parts of me. Just like being black, it's a part of me. Being gay, it's a part of me. But to constantly like just walk in a room and just have to, mark myself just seems like it doesn't make sense to me anymore.
I respect that, and you should honor what feels good, always.
Yeah. So I saw that you grew up in Inglewood. How was that for you?
That's a loaded question. I appreciate being a product of Inglewood, both in the sense that I celebrate that there are so many people, literally and figuratively, in and around and connected to Inglewood who continue to conspire for my success to this day. In fact, I speak frequently through social media with my sensei, right? The guy who ran the dojo where I took karate for some 15 years of my life, and celebrate that. Like, he sees the way that I show up in the world. He and his entire family see the way that I show up in the world, and celebrate it. I went through a rites of passage program for Black boys, ran by the Inglewood Police Department, and celebrate that continues to be something that I draw power from. And it, like, I imagine growing up in most major metropolitan spaces in unique ways was challenging. Thinking about the Proxima, I think what I appreciate is that my family did a really good job of balancing proximity such that I knew what was happening in the world around us, but also always felt safe. Now, to be clear, as I remind folks all the time, don't get it twisted, right? Like, I fight. I had to fight, right? To be clear, I understand what that's about, right? I grew up in a space where rolling 60s controlled a whole lot of area and the movement of people throughout spaces. I took a bus an hour each way from school in Inglewood to Brentwood and then Paul Revere and Pacific Palisades. So there was a lot of maneuvering, and me in particular having to show up and draw upon different skills in order to negotiate safely through different spaces. And at this point in my life, I wouldn't trade any of it.
Yeah, that's dope. Were you open like about your sexuality when you were growing up in Inglewood?
No, insofar as I dated women when I was growing up. Yeah, and this is how like these terms show up, right? So what's challenging about even discussions about like, when did you know or when did you first, is that development is fluid. And for a significant portion of my adolescence, at the point in which I was engaged in romantic relationships, they were with women. And I was fully invested and showed up in each of those relationships to the greatest extent of my ability. And so while I negotiated being in spaces where my masculinity showed up in ways that called into question my maleness, and faggot was the easiest thing for somebody to say because you couldn't say a whole lot of things about the way that I show up in the world. That was a thing. But sexuality for me wasn't then what it is now.
Man, I appreciate you sharing that. And I think that is why I do enjoy having these conversations, because it gets to show that we aren't a monolith. Because for me, I never dated women. I never really felt an attraction to women. Like, it just, my body just wouldn't respond to it. And,
honestly, what I'm thinking is that, and I have this thought often when I appreciate you being a gold star gay, is what I think that the white gays call it. Um, and I'm smiling because I often think when cis het people ask very righteously, like, when did you know? My
Mm-hmm.
frequent response is, well, when did you know? And there's this like, well, I don't know if I ever had to know. And, I know that I don't like chocolate ice cream as much as I like strawberry ice cream. I know that because I've tried both of them. And so,
Yeah.
um, I appreciate the space you occupy, and there's a part of me that wish that you um, may have had more diverse experiences.
And you know what? I'm trying to slowly create that for myself. I do feel like a late bloomer in the sense of like I first opened up about my sexuality at 26. I feel like I felt it since I was probably as early as third grade, but growing up and not having any like living examples of a queer person, like I really lived in denial of even, being same gender loving.
Yeah,
And when I got to LA, that was like the first time I actually met men that identified as gay or whatever they identified as. And it really was like a mind fuck for me, because it was like, but I play sports, I'm masculine, my wrist is, and these are the type of thoughts that I was really having because I never had experienced somebody gay. And it made me depressed for a while till I accepted, like, this is who I am. And, it's been a journey ever since. And I just signed up for, well, not signed up, but I just started going to these Vogue classes because voguing requires you to be very feminine. Yes.
at least in touch with your feminine energy, right? That one of the things that I appreciate most
Exactly.
about folks who master the art is that it's a balance of both masculinity and femininity, and it's a pushing on the very boundaries that attempt to constrain and suggest what each is supposed to be.
It is a mental challenge for me. And it reminds me of when I first started going to yoga.
Yeah, I think that makes
When I first started going to yoga, I was worried about who's looking at me, who's watching me. And then I went through this phase of like, okay, I have to be doing it perfect. And now I'm in that phase of like, okay, this is about you. It's not about nobody else. And it's really for me to feel completely free
yeah,
within my body.
yeah.
I'm not trying to be more feminine or less masculine or anything. I just want to know that I can go wherever I choose within this body.
I love that. And in particular,
I
I love it
appreciate that.
because it is an acknowledgement for me of something I've always said, which is that the most masculine in terms of what I understand the root of the term to mean. The most masculine men are men for whom their bodies would betray them, even if they tried to not perform um, in ways that are associated with femininity, right? Men who are clocked are assumed to be or otherwise show up in the world unapologetically as flamboyant as possible are among the strongest amongst us, in part because they are free in the way that I
Yeah.
celebrate you seeking to be.
Yeah, I appreciate that. And I agree with you. Like, you know, I've heard people have the argument of like who's had it worse, or out of masculine and feminine. It's not about who had it worse, but how can we learn from each other? And I do learn a lot from my more feminine brothers, because it's like you've had to, one, like, just pretty much fight to be yourself your entire life. And now, most that are adults are fully free. And I really want to reach that, because I feel it in myself, where it's like, oh, I'm still holding back a little bit in this space, or I'm still safe. You know what I mean?
Safety is important, and I pray that you find the freedom you're looking for.
I appreciate that. I appreciate that. Something that I connected to with you was being a kindergarten teacher.
Mm-hmm.
I was a music teacher for 3 years for elementary school, and I just quit my job last month. I just want to take on full time entrepreneurship,
Right.
but I'm curious to know, how was that experience for you being in the classroom?
being in the classroom, in particular, being in an elementary school classroom, was among the most challenging and rewarding experiences of my life. I resisted what I accept as a calling on my life to be an educator for as long as I could, in part because first generation college graduates from Columbia University aren't taught to be teachers. We're taught to take over companies and corporations, our countries and corporations, rather. Um, and while I'd always worked in ways that allowed me to like tutor or mentor or support the learning and development of children, it wasn't something that I saw myself in. Now, that's in spite of one of the most meaningful fixtures in my life was my fifth grade teacher, Mr. Shaw, who I'd later, when I worked in the Senate, would find out, because I wanted to find him and say thank you, was a TFA teacher in Inglewood, who also was a same gender loving Black man. That's just the way
Wow.
that the Lord works, and spirit animals.
Wow.
But being in the classroom, especially with my babies, who are amazing. I was smiling thinking about one that I recently reconnected with after my commencement, my PhD hooding. But they, enrolling me in the process of figuring out the world around them, helped to make these questions that seemed opaque and like esoteric, for lack of a more precise word, like real and palpable, right? Like I had, as an undergraduate student, had all these questions about Black masculine identity, and what it meant for us in part to be taught as a part of ritual rites of passage that we should smile now and cry later. For example, something I wrote about in my thesis. I saw that played out when I was one of three Black men in the building and was the only classroom teacher, right? My colleague taught art, another one taught PE. There was not a single Black boy out of 56 kindergartners. So watching my female identified students play house and not be able to imagine versions of boys that looked like me was a mind fuck, to use a term that you offered. I also was very aware of the way that older boys, so the school was set up such that it started with fourth graders who were then going to graduate out, and they would add students in kindergarten as those students matriculated. So at the time that I was teaching third grade, there were, 6 Black boys in the 6th grade. I ended up writing my master's thesis about their experience being in this space where I watched them shadow box against these expectations that my colleagues had about Black boys, and these ways that they showed up, right? Acknowledging some of them, adapting to some, and rejecting others. And it was being in that space that helped me to appreciate and ultimately take a pay cut from teaching, to test out public policy and how federal public policy in particular can be used to create opportunities. In this moment, I'm sitting with the sadness of appreciating that public policy codified by Congress via executive action or case law, what we're seeing via the Supreme Court, can also be used to oppress people and rob some people of basic civil and human rights. And so that experience not only prepared me for what it was like to work in the Senate with a bunch of adults who made kindergartners look graceful, it also helped me to really ground so much of my approach to equity through policy and practice based on the ways that they are often ignored and erased, especially with just an appreciation for the fact that learning starts at birth, and the preparation for that learning starts well before birth. And when it comes to our babies, they're not loved or supported enough.
I agree with that. I actually just came from working at a school where we definitely were the minority. And you could feel just just the kids. I don't know if they were getting the full attention that they needed. You know what I mean? Because there was a quote that you gave in another interview that I saw that resonated with me a lot. Was that I think it was, I've never met
That's Asa
a
Hilliard.
black student.
Yeah, Asa Hilliard said, "I've never met a child, in particular a black child, who is not a genius. There's no secret to how you support them. You first acknowledge them as human, and you second support them with love. And our babies get neither." That's what I was actually thinking about as I landed the plane and responding to the question. But yeah, Asa.
Yeah, yeah, and I agree with that because I've seen the students that, some people say may be challenging, but when you give them something that can challenge them, how interested they are in it. I used to substitute in Inglewood, and I would see, like I said, the challenging kids, but you ask them to write a rap or write something, and they just get so focused on that. And I guess I'm curious to know, what advice would you give to educators to, you know, really inspire black students? Because, sometimes the stuff that's there is just, it may not be enough, or it may just be too basic for them to be interested in.
Yeah, I'm looking for a book by Bell Hooks that might be in another library. She wrote in a book about teaching critical thinking, two things. And before I get to them, one for me is reframing some of this. So I've never met a child who was a problem child or a troubled child or a challenging child, right? They are all children. And
Right.
most often the children who are most insistent on letting us know that the spaces we force them to move through are not safe or supportive of them, are the ones we should be most attuned to. And the opposite usually happens. Those are the kids who usually get pushed out, right? Are pulled
Yeah.
into like prison or sex work, or other pipelines. And so appreciating what a mentor of mine, James Comer, who's connected to a Center for Child Development at Yale University, or Barbara Bowman, who's the godmother of the Erickson Institute in Chicago. What their work is really about is appreciating the process of development, which in particular for children happens over time, well into their late adolescence. So that's the first part of it. The second part and third part connected to Bell Hooks is that we push out of children a natural desire they have to think critically, to ask repeatedly why, literally and figuratively, to want to know and understand the essence of everything. And that for me is connected to our often, like I'm talking about Black folk, FOLX, queer folk, Black queer folk. Most Black folks are either born with or made to have a disability because of how white supremacy works, right? So folks with multiple marginalized identities often don't even have the space, literal or figurative, to dream, right? So for me, those are bookends, like thinking critically and then being able to dream. And so much of what I understand is an educator's responsibility is to create conditions so our babies can do those things. And otherwise hack solutions to seemingly intractable problems, right? Really think about the world in ways that might be freed from white supremacy and anti-Blackness and trans misogynoir, for example. That's the second part. The third part, which to me is being laid bare when I think about public policy and the way that politics is showing up during this convergence of so many crises. One inspired by the novel Coronavirus, the most recent of them, racism, white supremacy, and anti-blackness being chief and the most enduring among them, is that we have to appreciate that it is our responsibility. Bell Hooks writes that every generation is responsible for defending democracy. And I, as a sociologist like Asa Hilliard, study schools because I understand that they are essential to remaking social order. They are required for societies to exist and to thrive. And in this moment, not only are our babies, but our schools are sites of political contestation, right? Think about how Virginia and Florida and Alabama and Los Angeles, in terms of LAUSD, being one of the largest school systems, public school systems in the country, have all become sites of political warfare because of the reason that they are so essential to how societies function and remake themselves and teach about people and tolerance and compassion or lack thereof. And so the third answer to your question is that I hope educators who do God's work, right? It's being an educator is not something that anybody has to do. Right. In fact, I think a lot of people who are doing it should consider another profession, to be quite frank. Educators have a responsibility to appreciate that education is political. And I believe educators have a responsibility to defend democracy.
Wow. Wow. I appreciate you sharing that. I really do. Because, I guess I never really looked at it when I was in the profession as something that was political. So I appreciate you sharing that.
Everything is political.
Yeah.
Right. Not even to be funny about it. Right. Think about the fact that there are 3 ways to refer to a grown girl legally and formally. Right. She can be a Miss MISS, Miss MS, or Miss MRS. There's one way to refer to a grown boy. He's a Mister. Each of the designations associated with the move from a girl becoming a woman is attached to her relationship, assumed cisgender heterosexual relationship to a man. And it's not just that there are different terms, but each of them over time, because there have been changes through policy and case law, mean that that girl has different access to legal, economic, and social benefits or not. Yeah. Right. And so for me, this is one of the reasons why like jokes about the alphabet, super alphabet people unnerve me so much, especially because I insist on adding another because Sage of the Loving is what I prefer. Yeah. But like words matter and often are used to uphold what Black feminists refer to as this matrix of domination, right? These signs, systems, and symbols that allow white supremacy to be hyper visible and omnipresent at the same time. So yeah, I care a lot about words, clearly.
Yeah, and that's a good thing. Something I wanted to ask you though is, how did you get into the work that you do? Like, what inspired you to, I guess to really fight for everybody, fight for us?
It is a calling, and I have been privileged enough to be able to show up in it. My mother is the first fiercest advocate that I've ever known. And I watched her advocate to ensure that I had access to the same spaces that my white privileged classmates assumed access to. I, by nature, have always tested as like a lion or an owl because I care about justice and equity, and think a lot about the process of showing up in spaces where I understand and have come to understand over time what it means to be isolated and detached from the benefits of being a member of a society or a social order. formally, the answer to the question in terms of the professional opportunities I've had is that I've taken calculated risks, and I've listened to members of my ancestral spirit team when they've shown up through guardian angels to say, here's a fellowship. So, for example, when I was teaching, I was frustrated because there was a lot of stuff not happening at my school. There was a lot of things not happening in the district around it. And everybody kept talking about policy as a panacea. And I met someone who was running a program connected to the Congressional Black Caucus Foundation. And I applied the weekend before the application was due to be a CBCF fellow. I called a mentor who was a judge, shout out to Judge Joe Greenaway in New Jersey, who walked me around his office, who made phone calls, who tried to connect dots for me. And then I took a pay cut from teaching to move to DC to figure it out, thinking it can't be that hard. I'll figure it out myself. I had the pleasure before my fellowship ending, working for the Senate Help Committee. The Help Committee stands for Health, Education, Labor, and Pensions. It's the committee that sees more than 40% of legislation introduced in any given Congress in the Senate. So I, for 6, maybe 8 years, was the only Black male staffer who was responsible for all kinds of policy, from Head Start programs to student loans to child abuse prevention and treatment laws and workforce development programs, things like Job Corps and the like. And then I took a pay cut from that to go work to get President Obama reelected at the time when the Tea Party grew in power and it was not possible to develop legislation in the spirit of compromise. And I then had the opportunity to lead an initiative that didn't exist when I moved to DC, when President Obama, Barack Hussein Obama, to be clear, created an initiative called the White House Initiative on Educational Excellence for African Americans. And I said at the time that the executive order was announced that they weren't going to find anybody else who was better suited for the job, which remains to be true, and that they haven't filled the position through 2 subsequent administrations, which is also just sad. It's very, very sad, to be honest, because there are people who are qualified and competent. But, I had the opportunity to do that until it wasn't possible. And in that role, I met my board chair and CEO, who had the job that I now have. And we produced a summit for Black queer youth, which was significant for me because for the duration of my time on the Hill, there was a lived and false assumption that all queer kids were white, which has never been true. And conversely, that all Black kids were cisgender and heterosexual, which has never been true. And so there was never a conversation about or an attempt to develop and codify policies to protect children who are uniquely marginalized, right? Like kids who are assumed to be, because we're talking about development, right? These are terms, as you and I both discussed, that some adults don't find comfort in, right? What I know is that there are adults who engage in queer, romantic, intimate relationships who don't identify as queer. They don't have to, right? But children who either identify as or who more often are assumed to be queer, with a capital Q, which is that is not heterosexual or cisgendered or pejorative. They don't have the same rights as their peers right now in public schools. And so knowing all of this and being mindful of opportunities to leverage my skills and acquired and earned privilege, and when I mean that, I'm talking about the fact that I'm like 6'5", I'm real clear about the things that I know, and I walk up in rooms being real disruptive. I used to say sucking up oxygen, but my brother Ryan is like, no, you give oxygen. So being clear about my privilege and using it to be disruptive for good. Does that answer your question?
That's really dope. It did. And something that popped in my head as you were speaking was like, what keeps you going with the work that you do? Because I know it can probably be emotionally taxing, but like, what keeps you pushing through it?
Yeah, I was not joking when I said coffee. Shout out to my girl Ebony Riley, uh, National Action Network. She saw me in a meeting some time ago, and like sent me a coffee maker. See, Black women. One of my findings, my favorite findings from my dissertation, is that Black women are responsible for everything beautiful in the world, and it's true.
I believe that
My
too.
dissertation also affirmed what you described as your experience growing up in the South, which is why representation matters. So I am inspired by the babies. Last week, we're having this conversation as Pride Month winds down. And last week, NBJC co-produced a series of events with New York City Pride. And the conference that they hosted started with a panel of student experts, one in middle school and everyone else college students, one
Wow.
graduate. And this for me is important because adults often talk about students and render them mute after talking about the importance of their voice by reading a letter or sharing a video. And I'm like, no, let them talk for themselves. Right. They keep people honest and they also are experts in their lived experience. So the
Yeah.
summit started with them, my babies, speaking truth to power and talking about the responsibility of solving problems that adults have abdicated responsibility for in some really beautiful ways. I posted a part of a video on my Instagram, which is Dr. David Johns, Johns. I'm going to post another in short order. So being around them and watching the ways that they pursue passion and centered thriving is something that always makes me happy. It gives me soul food and compels me or gives me fuel to continue to do the work. I'm also big about, I have on my tattooed on my arm, Guard Your Joy, and then a Basquiat crown. I'm really big on things that are often reserved for white women who do yoga and go to tea in the middle of the day. So I believe in going to the spa and taking trips and experiencing luxury, um, riding horses and swimming, and doing things that falsy white people feel like, rich white people in particular, feel like they have a reserve on, and encourage people to do that which makes sense for them, right? The older I get, the more I appreciate why almost all of the elders in my family, male identified in particular, had gardens and spent time grounding themselves in the earth, or did things like go fishing. And I'm a Pisces, so I live near and I'm looking
Okay.
at a body of water any chance that I can to have to be in a body of water or standing in the shower talking to the ancestors. I do. And then the last thing is I read a whole lot, right? What I appreciate about completing my dissertation, and I recently received a copy of my dissertation in a bound book, and then a letter from the Library of Congress that's essentially a reminder that like my work will exist a lot longer than I'm able to breathe. There's so many, not even secrets, but there's so many lessons, to use the right word. There's so many lessons that our ancestors have given us. Many of them exist in books. And so I try to read and reflect and write as much as possible to go back to where we start and land this plane. A part of why I celebrate same gender loving is because there's a series of conversations between Uncle Jimmy James Baldwin and Nikki Giovanni, Nikki, where they are in Paris and they're talking about many of the challenges that Black folk are experiencing. And there's a lot that they disagree upon. Their perspectives are radically different, as they should be, right? That's a part of what makes life dynamic and beautiful. And the answer that they both come to so frequently in terms of the solution to the problems is love. And so I celebrate that there are so many folks, Black folk in particular. There's a book up here, down there, by Robert Patterson called the Prof. Robert Patterson, Robert Jones Jr. called the Prophets. That for me, I always describe him as if like James Baldwin and Toni Morrison had a literary baby, it would be him. But the book centers two Black men who the term didn't exist, but would be same gender loving, who love each other on a plantation. And it's fine until it's not because somebody makes it so. And they use religion as a tool to divide what was otherwise a source of divine, like light and life. And there are all these reclamations of ways of being connected to our African ancestry that goes beyond the binary, where there are female identified rulers and where there are gatekeepers that show up helping to connect dots between the future and the present. There is like these moments of mysticism that are very palpable for folks who understand the Black liberation tradition. And there are references to other stories and books that have come before it. And so I hope that people are mindful of the fact that our ancestors in particular, other race warriors, Bell Hooks and Toni Morrison and Audre Lorde, James Baldwin, have all written down clues that we should be using to get free.
It's James Woods, aka that yoga dude with Feel Free to Feel Free. I am inviting transformation. I am inviting settle. I am inviting calm. I am inviting relax. I am inviting cool, collect. I'm inviting it all in. So much stress, so much worry, so much pressure. That's trying to hurry up and rush into my life. Only giving a pass to cool, calm, collected, relaxed, settled, mindful, easy, peaceful, healing. And I send the invitation through my breath. Let's take 3 deep inhales and exhales to invite in the calm. 1, 2, 3. Breathe in. And breathe out. Deep breath in. And breathe out. Relax your shoulders. Breathe in. Relax your face and breathe out. Make room for calm. And as always, feel free to feel free. And namaste. Peace.
That's dope. I appreciate you sharing that. I wanted to move now into some listener questions. So we have a segment called Ask Me a Question where the listeners send in questions and they shout us some stuff.
Have people actually been listening?
Yes, I put it on Instagram. Well, actually, nobody's here right now. Okay. I just opened it up if anybody wanted to be. But I had some people send in some Instagram questions. And I guess I could start with Byron's because
of course.
His first question says,
of course he said the multiple questions too. Because know your people. It would be Byron if he did it. Byron is brilliant, as y'all know.
He really is. He really is. Yeah. He says, my good friend Byron said that you often say something beautifully profound along the lines of if you love Black people, then you love queer Black people, because since there have been Black people, there have been queer Black people.
Yeah.
Could you speak about the impact of that statement in challenging folks who claim to love Black people but struggle with loving them intersectionally?
Yes, I appreciate the question, brother. And so the bottom line is that it's disingenuous at best to say that you love Black people and then draw a line around which Black people that you love. It would be more honest to simply say you love Black people that reflect the best parts of you. And what that is rooted in is an appreciation for a point I hope that I made clearly earlier, which is that religion and Christianity in particular has been used as a tool to divide Black folk. In the same way that policies, war on drug policies were designed in part to remove Black men from households. The Supreme Court's most recent decisions around reproductive justice or the lack of rights is an intentional effort to criminalize birthing members of our community. There continue to be efforts to divide Black cisgender heterosexual folk from Black queer trans and non-binary people. The same thing is happening outside of our community. But again, because I'm Black and I center Black people, that's the conversation we're having in this moment. And two things contribute to this. One is religious trauma, right, which is something that is included in the DSM. This is a connection to Byron and the work that he does. But there has been a recent acknowledgement by the American Psychological Association of the damage done by the ways in which they've talked about homosexuality, to use their term, are having trans experience as a mental disorder rather than simply a normal, natural, one of the other terms they use to affirm the heterosexual agenda, traditional lived experience. The other thing that they've acknowledged are the ways in which religious trauma, often with white-centered conversations about our experiences center conversion therapy, but it's a lot of church hurt, right? And so there are ways in which we are taught that homosexuality is not only an aberration of those who love the Lord, but it is something that people do because they want to be white or closer to whiteness. And those things are false. The second thing that happens is in the storytelling, the fantasy peddling of Hollywood and others, there's an erasure of the fact that we've always been here, we specifically Black, queer, trans, and non-binary people. And so this is one of the reasons why, like, Bayard Rustin is a fixture in my house, and on this side, there's a picture of Marsha P. Johnson. And I use them but as examples of things that happen to us continually. And so what I hope people appreciate is that Bayard Rustin, if it were not for Bayard Rustin, who was arrested for homosexual acts, for having sex, consensual sex as an adult, which was pardoned posthumously. If it were not for Bayard Rustin, there would not have been a March on Washington. Bayard Rustin was responsible for introducing pacifism and other forms of nonviolent protests, to Dr. King for orchestrating the March on Washington, for implementing lessons that he learned doing this work globally. And yet every Black History Month, when the McDonald's commercial rings the bell and we start having watershed recognition of these figures, he is erased. Similarly, you and I are having this conversation again as Pride Month comes to a close. So many people forget that, or never even know that Pride began in protest. And it exists because in New York City, as was the case in other parts of the country, there were laws that made it legal for folks to discriminate and not sell liquor to, quote, homosexuals who are believed to not be able to handle their liquor like their cisgender heterosexual peers. A lie. There were rules that said that you had to dress in specific ways associated with expected gender presentation. There were laws that prohibited folks from holding hands if in same-gender loving relationships in public. And so what this meant is that people sought refuge in places like the Stonewall Inn, where they could otherwise be, in the same way that people did at Pulse nightclub before the massacre that happened there. People were forced into these spaces where they were attempting to seek safety and refuge and a bit of respite and joy. And police would raid it in the same way that a terrorist, raided and caused indelible trauma at Pulse. And if it were not for Marsha P. Johnson, a Black trans woman who stood up in that moment at Stonewall and said, we're not dealing with this on tonight, and then engaged in a week of protracted resistance, there might not be what we refer to now as an LGBTQ movement or LGBTQIA plus movement or Pride anything. And yet annually, Pride pimping happens, and Marsha and her beautiful blackness and her beautiful black transness, and Sylvia P. Rivera, her Afro-Latinx trans sister, are erased. And so I say this to say that not only do Black folk who have privilege, who don't even have to think about what it means to be cisgendered, which simply means that the sex that a doctor guessed and assigned to you at birth is consistent with how you identify, which is the opposite of transgender, right? For Black men who don't have to appreciate what it means to be a Black feminist until they have a daughter, although they are born from often Black mothers and have sisters and are loved by aunts, some of whom might be trans or queer. Each of us who understand the sting of stigma, simply because we have skin that's been kissed by the sun, have an obligation to understand what I had said earlier, which is Fannie Lou Hamer's, it's not mine, which is none of us are free unless and until all of us are free. And the intentional desire to divide us, to say in this moment, let the queer folk in, let the lesbians in. We erase bi people like they don't exist, especially if they're women. We don't appreciate the dynamism that shows up in relationships, to go back to an earlier question you asked me. But keep your trans and non-binary siblings outside. There's not an appreciation for the fact that we've seen this play be run hundreds of times before, right? Like, this is why the brother wrote the poem And Then They Came, when thinking about Hitler creating and then trying to solve the problem of the Jew. And so this is a really long way of saying that I would much prefer for homophobic, transphobic, ableist Black folk to say that they love themselves and want themselves and those they love to be free, rather than lying and taking up space by saying that they love Black people, which means that you have to love all of us. And in particular, if you are a person of faith, you have to love the least of these, or what Howard Thurman called the dispossessed.
It's powerful. Byron's second question is, you recently got your PhD. Mm-hmm. Could you tell us a bit about what you got the doctorate in and how you imagine that education will add the impact to the work you are doing?
Yeah, I appreciate the question. To the first part of the question, I'm a sociologist. I spoke a bit about why, and in short, it's because I appreciate the ways that social order helps to explain how we engage with each other, why we engage with each other or not. And there are lots that falls under sociology, including how stigma works, physical stigma. People used to mark folks with like letters, like scarlet letters. And now that stigma has morphed into terms and communities. But they still have the same ostracizing impact. And I have always been fascinated by how our society is divided by public and private schools, and then subdivided therein, where throughout most of our country, as First Lady Michelle Robinson Obama used to often say, access to opportunity is predicated by code, either one's zip code or their genetic code, and sometimes both. And so for me, this connects to the second part. As a through line is, I had someone say to me my freshman year at Columbia that I could pose questions and then be paid to find the answer. And I thought to myself, next to selling drugs, like that's the coldest hustle ever. I'm too cute to go to jail. Now I will go. Don't test me if I need to. Don't want to be clear. But I was like, sign me up. And I've been, on it thereafter. Du Bois wrote in the study of the Philadelphia Negro, I want to say it's early in that book, that based on our lot in life, like based on what Black people have been through, we should have no other responsibility but to think about it and how to make it better. My words, not his. And for me, a PhD is that. I'm very clear that a lot of people pursue PhDs to have the career that I had before I got a PhD. I was incredibly privileged in having the ability to publish and speak nationally and internationally and be seen as an expert on a range of topics, including domestic federal policy. Before I acquired the degree, and the degree did three things for me. One, it allowed me to go back to my safe space. I am adept at navigating institutions, in particular schools. And so when in 2017, things changed politically, he who shall not be named took office. He didn't earn office, but he took office. It was a space where I could think about what had happened and what could be after that administration. Boy, if I knew then what I know now. The second thing that I was clear about is that I would sharpen my skills as a researcher. So for folks who don't understand or really appreciate what a PhD does, for most folks it's an intensive process of sharpening research skills. And most research at this level either shows up as one of three ways: qualitative, quantitative, or mixed methods. And in short, quantitative methods are like using statistics to be able to count things. Qualitative methods are those that are associated with things like critical race theory and intersectionality, which is not something that was created by Kimberly Crenshaw, though she helped to introduce it into the academy. But Patricia Hill Collins helps us to appreciate as an indigenous practice engaged in by people over centuries. But these things allow folks to challenge master narratives and use tools that are often associated with anthropology to help tell stories of people who are in marginalized positions. And then the third is mixed methods, which is to use both, which is what I did in my research study. And so it's really about sharpening skills so that I could talk with greater authority about the things that I'm already an expert on. And it allowed me to be really selfish in carving out a space in the academy that I think is not only worthy of further study, but important to claim. So the center of my research was acknowledging that still to this day, when most people talk about Black kids, they don't queer the conversation. There's never space for the fact that they might also be queer, which means certain things, especially when there's data from GLSEN and the Trevor Project and NBJC, which says that like kids, especially Black queer kids, find schools to be incredibly hostile spaces, right? No surprise when the Black Lieutenant Governor of North Carolina is standing in the pulpit of a Black church calling them garbage. Or you got Alabama and Texas and Florida passing laws that say like these parts of you are not welcomed in this space, right? Like doing things that amount to the Nuremberg laws in Nazi Germany, to make this really, really plain. And it allowed me to trouble the reality that we don't collect data, intersectional data, interoperable data, to allow for the centering of any of this stuff in research. There are millions of dollars that are given to people to research things connected to education. But if you pull the 7 largest national data sets, they're not going to ask kids questions about intersectional identities or what it means to be Black and queer in public schools in a country that hates you people who are Black and queer, without acknowledgement for our appreciation rather for intersectionality. And it allowed me to center the voices of experts who are too often neglected and ignored. So to have the ability to have done that and to know that I will find ways to publish, and in 5 years the embargo will be released so people can just find it. But it'll exist and people can cite it. And I hope that it'll inspire other people to ask related questions and to build on this foundation that's a unique part of the academy that I've carved out for myself.
Yeah. And Byron's last question is: it is clear that you are a great thinker, and I think it is safe to say a public intellectual of sorts. Who are some of your heroes and inspirations that have occupied that space?
those are two separate but related questions. Who are some of my heroes, and who are folks who've occupied space as a public intellectual who I appreciate? I count as in the hero category. For me, that's I struggle with the he part of it. So ordinary people who do extraordinary things. My mother, my godfather, Jason Stanford. He worked at NASA. And for a long time, I thought I was going to be an astronaut. That was the answer to this question I'd always had about wanting to be remembered after I died. And there's a picture that someone gave to him after working on a mission with this patch that I see when I enter or leave my home. And the educators that continue to hold me. I was really, really proud of the moment when I could write in my dissertation an acknowledgement of folks like Mr. Shaw or Dr. Butler, Elizabeth Butler, who was my high school math teacher and mentor to this day, who continue to light a path. The second but related question in terms of public intellectuals, I've named a number of them. Many of them are Black, queer, folk, like Audre Lorde, or James Baldwin, or Richard Wright, or Bell Hooks, folks who have taken the time to write things. I appreciate, in terms of the way that I show up in the world, that Minister Farrakhan is one of the greatest orators that we've ever encountered. I think a lot also about the way that James Baldwin commanded public attention. And Fannie Lou Hamer is someone who I believe is what's the term? Overlooked is not quite the right term. I'm trying to think of the term that people use when they're talking about like an artist who's underappreciated. But she's one of the fiercest public speakers that we've ever had as well. I think that answers the question.
Yeah. I have 3 more listener questions. So I have one from, let's see, this is an Instagram question from, let's see, wait, where is his name? So this is a question from Edgar. What papers, presentations, or studies are you most proud of, and why?
All of them. Yeah, I mean, I say that somewhat tongue in cheek, but the process of creating and forming an argument, at a minimum, a critique, but more than that, especially when I think about my dissertation, like there are theories that I have offered up and tested, right? Hypotheses that I literally tested to create something that is recorded on what was at some point a blank page is no easy feat. To be clear, right? A lot of people think that like writing books and processing in ways that, you know, you're required to when engaging in public discussion is easy, and it ain't. A lot of people can't do it. And if I had to think about specific products to answer the question more precisely, 2 come to mind. One, most recently, I co-authored a paper, an essay with a dear friend of mine, Dr. Lauren C. Mims, who was the deputy director of the White House Initiative I mentioned earlier, and 2 other Black female, both PhDs, about our experiences as classroom teachers. And I wrote about one of my babies, Nikea, who I know still to this day in real life, and what it meant to be her teacher and to be responsible for ensuring she was safe. And I'm really proud of that essay. The second is my master's thesis, which was, I know, titled Shadowboxing. I can't forget what came after it. But it was something about reimagining Black masculine identity. That might be it. Was published in the State of Black America report produced by the Urban League in 2007. The cover of this book, which is around here somewhere, has a picture of President Obama on it. And all of the essays are focused on Black masculine identity. Excuse me. So for my, what was my master's thesis to be included as the first essay in a seminal text that so many public policy experts were referencing, it got me noticed by my guardian angel, Susan Taylor, and invited to Essence to talk about it. Was something that will always be a high point over the course of my career. And one, to go back to Byron's last question, another public intellectual that I admire and appreciate is my dear friend, Angela Rye.
Okay. Nice. This question is from Yassine the Great. Are there spaces as a queer Black person you feel the need to avoid?
My visceral response is yes, and I like trouble. So it's like yes and no. It's like yes and the very spaces where I should go, and spaces I'm gonna show up and be like, "What the fuck we gonna do now?" So I have a work in progress, and we need to be safe, right?
Yes.
To be clear, every year since I've quarterbacked the team at NBJC has been the deadliest year on record in terms of fatalistic violence for Black trans folk and femme-identified folk. So I don't want to downplay the fact that our safety is almost always in jeopardy. And while comfortable in my body, right, I've been kicked out of ride shares because my nails are painted, or I talk with my hands and invite people to ask questions that they think they're entitled to about my sex life. Interesting that people often ask about sex and never if am I loved, but that goes back to terms. So the shorter answer to this question is yes and no. I am privileged enough to be able to curate my life such that I don't frequently hold space for or tolerate people who think that they can tolerate me. And so much of my work is showing up in spaces with people who are intolerant and reminding them that they have an obligation to either demonstrate compassion and increase competence or move and get out of the way. And so it's really, really complicated. And to be more precise, right, like my mother's, I mean, there's a lot of siblings, Black family, whole nother podcast. But the brother who's closest to her in age, I grew up, we were incredibly close. Uncle Ronnie, he used to call me a Tasmanian devil and sing the Captain Caveman. If anybody, I'm aging myself. I was born in 82. Shout out to the 80s babies. Captain Caveman, which was a cartoon that existed at the time. But I, a couple years ago, fairly recent, not too long ago, posted something about our responsibility as Black folks to protect Zaya Wade. This, for me, is, again, this belief that a part of what binds Black folks is this commitment to doing life such that our babies have things better than we had it. And Zaya's what people would say is radical, but is just beautiful and subversive and powerful. But her ability to show up in the world in the way that she does, belonging to the family that she was born into, is something that we, as folks who desire to be free, should protect. And my uncle ended up writing in a comment on this post something about, like, you know, this is what's wrong with the world, and at some point the real men are going to stand up, and it just sit me, right? And this comes up for me in the work that I do, because I continue to say to some of these platforms, including Meta, that, you know, policies, community guidelines are set up such that it doesn't acknowledge the harm in that comment, right? Which was really about denying that baby's existence and suggesting that her existence is a problem when it's the exact opposite, and in some ways insinuating or wishing harm on her and people like her, or possibly those who love her. There was something else about her father in that as well, such that my response was then limited and would be a clear violation of their policies when I make clear that not only do I find fault with what you said, but if I see you, it's on site, right? And so I am privileged enough to not have to show up in spaces where he and I got to share space, and know that so many members of the community don't have that privilege, right? Like they might live in the home with the Uncle Ronnie or, insert ignorant family member here. And so acknowledging that while there are ways that I can curate, I also do a lot of showing up in unwelcomed, unfriendly, unsupported territories such that other people don't have to.
That's what's up. I have one more listener question, and then I have 2 closeout questions. But my last listener question is from Megan, and it is: has it been more challenging being same gender loving and accepted by Black people, or Black and being accepted by the LGBTQ community?
It's a beautiful question, but it's an impossible question to answer, Megan. It presupposes that I am able to parse out either of those inextricably linked parts of my identity. It also doesn't acknowledge that experiences are dynamic. And my life is often informed by both among other things, my Blackness and my same gender lovingness, to the extent that that is a part of one's filter or experience of me. I'm also 6'5", right? And have the skin tone and all of my teeth, and I talk with my body. So if there's something that I'm trying to say, is that I wish for us to get beyond the surface in terms of our understanding of how identity works, especially social political identity constructs that reference parts of our lived experience, because it's much more complicated than that.
Yeah, I agree with that too. What is one piece of advice that you would give to your younger self?
I've written about this. I've written notes to my younger self for the last 3 years on my birthday, February 21st. And the thread through each of the messages is to honor your power. What I know is that there are people who fear the freedom that results in the kind of power that queer people have when we think about what can be when we are creating community in ways that hasn't existed heretofore, when we find ways to hack beautiful solutions to seemingly intractable problems, when we take up space in ways and forms that people say we shouldn't. There's something not just freeing about it and liberating. But there's something that's like magical about it, right? I'm thinking of this moment about Jesse Williams and the speech she gave some time ago. And that thing, that the way that we show up and show out and do the thing that people love to imitate, is for those who don't understand it and who are threatened by it, the source of so much angst. And for babies who defy the limitations of socially constructed boxes, I'm thinking in particular, there was a baby in Atlanta who his sort of folks put the camera on him and, asked him, how you identify? And he, sassy and had his response. And they ended up cutting the word faggot in his head and bullying him on camera. And, they asked him again, like, trying to sort of punk it out of him, like, butch up or, present in a different way. And he, gave it like same attitude, same sass. When I think about what's required for babies to show up in the world like that, my hope is that they know at some point, not necessarily that it gets better, because we have to do work to ensure that it gets better, but that they are beautiful and that they are powerful and that they are wonderfully made and that there's nothing wrong with them. The problem is with the world that they were brought into, invited into. And so my message to my younger self and to all of the babies is to honor your power.
I appreciate that.
Mm-hmm.
And my last question is, what makes you feel free?
What makes me feel free? What makes me feel free? Those words are ringing in my ears because, not because the visceral response is that I am free. I don't know that is there a thing that makes me feel free? Maybe the answer is my being, existing in the world in a way that is an affront to, and some might say subversive and challenging institutions and expectations, but existing in my body unapologetically and having found comfort in every crevice of it is freeing. I don't know if that answers the question.
It does. It does.
Like it makes sense to me. Yeah.
I hear my grandmother in my head as I say your name because she would say, he earned those letters, so call him those letters. So Dr. David John.
Which is also funny because I've said for a long time that like I don't want Black people to call me doctor. And I'm struggling even with the term because I know that like Black people love a title. And so even when I said, I'm like, well, it's really for white folks. I insist that white people call me doctor as a form of reparations, but Black people, it's like, no, doctor, I'm gonna call you doctor. You earned that doctor. So I appreciate it. I'm still not used to it. And I appreciate it.
Of course. Where can the people find you?
In these streets? I am at Dr. David Johns on Instagram, at Mr. David Johns across other platforms because it's just too much to transition everything at this point. And then the work is nbjc.org or NBJC on the move across all digital platforms.
That's what's up. Thank you so much for coming on the show. I really do appreciate this. I feel like I learned so much just talking to you. So I really appreciate you coming on.
My pleasure. Thanks for making space and for inviting me into parts of your journey.
Thank you. Thank you. And thank y'all for listening. This is Mike Brown, and this is The Art of Letting Go. Peace. Thank you all for tuning into The Art of Letting Go. If you like what you heard, please be sure to subscribe to the podcast wherever you listen. Also, leave a review. Let people know what you think. Let me know what you think because I do read those reviews. Also, if you would like to further support the show, and I appreciate all the support that you all give, listening to the show, sharing it with your people. But if you'd like to further support the show, you can subscribe to us on Patreon, where we have exclusive content. I share some of the other stuff I'm working on. Also, you can buy some merch from the artoflettinggopodcast.com, and please send us your questions. I love to hear from y'all. This is Mike Brown. Peace.